Hello everyone, welcome to Bajirao IAS Academy, the Hindu news analysis. So today is 6th July, Saturday, 2024, and in today's session we will be discussing some important articles which were covered in Hindu and Indian Express newspapers. And these articles that we are going to discuss in this class are very important from the exam perspective, right? So one by one we'll try to discuss all those important articles in a much more detailed manner. And before discussing them, you all knew that yesterday I have given one practice question that is with respect to the military exercises conducted by India with other friendly countries. The question was the exercise Maitri recently seen in news, and it is a joint military exercise conducted between which of the following countries. So that is the question, and I have asked you to answer this question in the comment section. So please try to answer these questions in the comment section, right? Now active participation from your side is also very helpful for you in your preparation, right? So correct answer for this question is option B, India and Thailand. The military exercise between India and Thailand is known as the exercise Maitri, right? So this is joint military exercise between India and Thailand. As I've already told you that this is a joint military exercise between India and Thailand, and it is the 13th edition of the India-Thailand joint military exercise, and this exercise is called as exercise Maitri. Right, so Maitri translates to friendship between two countries, so hence the name. And apart from that, when we talk about this Maitri military exercise, as I have already told you that this is 13th edition of joint military exercise between India and Thailand, and in fact this exercise is scheduled to be conducted from 1st to 15th of July 2024 at Thailand. Right, so this will be conducted in Thailand, and in fact the last edition of the same exercise was conducted in Umroi, Meghalaya in September 2019. Right, so the last edition was conducted in India itself, but now it will be conducted in Thailand. So what is the basic aim or objective of this military exercise? So the basic aim of military exercise is to foster military cooperation between India and Thailand. So it essentially aimed to foster the military cooperation, interoperability, and everything which is part of this joint military exercise, and that is the objective. So hence option B is the correct answer. And today also I have some interesting question. Remember that about this gharials, there was also a question previously in the UPSC, right? So therefore these gharials are very important from the exam perspective. The question is, consider the following statements. Statement 1 says that gharials are the saltwater crocodiles. They found only in India. So this is the first statement. Now in these type of questions, if you eliminate one option, so if you knew that one statement is incorrect out of all these three statements, you can correctly arrive at the answer, right? So okay, now since it is asking about incorrect statement, this is also important. So if it is asking about the incorrect statement, so it would be a bit difficult, right? So since it is not asking about the correct statement, right, so it is asking about the incorrect statement, so you have to be careful here also. And second statement says that the IUCN classifies gharials as critically endangered, and as they are in immense danger of extinction. This is the second statement, right? So we all knew that International Union for Conservation of Nature releases a red list of species, and it also categorizes species across different categories based on the threat of extinction. For example, least concerned, vulnerable, endangered, critically endangered, extinct in the wild, or extinct, right? So such categorization is provided in the IUCN red list. So therefore the second statement says that IUCN classifies gharials as critically endangered species. And third statement says that this Kukrail gharial breeding center is located in Bhopal, Madhya Pradesh, right? So these are the 3 statements. Try to answer this question in the comment section, and I will be providing the correct answer in tomorrow's class. Now we'll start this discussion with few important articles. The first article is about the swine fever, right? So it is about the African swine fever, and this particular fever outbreak took place in Kerala recent times, right? So we will understand the basic nuances of this particular disease, how it transmits, and any impact on the human beings if they transmitted with this virus, and what is the treatment, any vaccines are available, what is the treatment and symptoms. We'll understand everything with respect to this African swine fever, right? So such type of questions are such type of an articles are important only for the prelims perspective, right? It is not that broad to be asked in the mains examination. From the prelims perspective, such articles are important. Now the context is that recently in Kerala, as many as 310 pigs were culled. Okay, so in Kerala's Thrissur, more than 310 pigs were culled after the outbreak of this African swine fever. Now generally, pigs are the first affected due to the African swine fever. So in order to prevent the further spread of this African swine fever from different pig farms, now what the farmers will generally do, farmers generally cull, or it will lead to the killing of these pigs, so that the disease will not spread to the other pigs and from pigs to the human beings, right? So it will not result in a larger epidemic. So therefore, farmers just kill these pigs to prevent the spread of the disease along with the administrative machinery. So therefore, the outbreak in African swine fever has led to the killing of around 310 pigs in Kerala, and in fact this African swine fever was reported in a private farm, okay, in a private farm in Kerala. Now when we talk about the African swine fever, so it is a viral disease. African swine fever is a viral disease. Now when we talk about the pathogens which causes different diseases, so they include bacteria, virus, fungi. So there were different pathogens which causes diseases, and African swine fever is a viral disease, so that you have to remember. So it is a viral disease and it affects pigs. So African swine fever primarily affect pigs and even wild boars. And therefore, whenever African swine fever affects pigs or wild boars, it leads to the large scale mortality or increase in the death of the poultry pigs or wild boars. However, when we talk about this African swine fever, whenever this fever transmits from pigs to human beings because of insanitary conditions working in these pig poultry farms, and also eating pig meat, right? So all these factors would lead to the swine fever. African swine fever would transmit to the human beings also, but it would not be that much harmful for the human beings. However, even though it is not that much harmful for the human beings, so it usually disrupts the socio-economic systems in those affected regions, right? So it is a well-known fact that whenever there is any disease which has been emerging and which has been spreading fast, of course it would impact the socio-economic systems in that particular region, and that is what happening with this African swine fever also. Now when we talk about the transmission of this African swine fever, so how it usually transmits from pigs to human beings or from human beings to human beings, right? So when we have a direct contact with the infected pigs or animals, so this disease would transmit to human beings. And apart from that, whenever we eat this contaminated animal products or animal meat, so then also there is a possibility of transmission of this African swine fever into human beings. And even if we get into contact with contaminated equipment and clothing, so then also there is a possibility of the spread of this disease. And even bites from the infectious ticks will also spread this disease easily to human beings and other animals, right? So now there are few symptoms. So how do you get to know that someone infected with this African swine fever, or pigs infected with the African swine fever? So there are some symptoms. So the symptoms included fever, abortions, bleeding, sudden deaths, depression, loss of appetite, skin hemorrhages. So all these are the basic symptoms of a person or an individual who is infected with the African swine fever. Now, how can we control this African swine fever? Even if someone gets affected with the African swine fever, what should be the treatment that has to be administered for that particular individual? Now, when we talk about this African swine fever, so currently there are no vaccines available, right? So currently there are no vaccines available for this African swine fever. So since no vaccine is available, so we just have to treat the symptoms only, right? So we need to treat the symptoms. When we are able to treat the symptoms, so there is a chance that the infected individual would over a period of time would be relieved of these symptoms. So therefore currently there are no vaccines and no cures for the African swine fever. So however, when we talk about the control measures of this African swine fever, so the control measures generally include strict biosecurity protocols, movement restrictions, human beings or animal meat or animal products, and culling of infected animals. So in a similar way that took place in Kerala. Right. So whenever we talk about the culling of animals, now in the case of avian influenza also, whenever it hits the poultry sector, farmers generally cull the poultry birds, right? So they just burn all those poultry birds, right? So that is how the culling usually takes place, so that would prevent the spread of this disease to new areas or new regions, or more number of pigs or animals getting infected with such diseases, and even people infecting with the African swine fever. So in order to prevent that, culling is one method that is widely followed in those kind of diseases. Right. So when we talk about the prevention of this particular disease, so prevention can be possible, but when we talk about the prevention, first and foremost thing was that any person is infected with the African swine fever, a proper treatment must be administered, must be given to that particular individual. And apart from that, we should also focus on prevention of this illegal imports of live pigs or pork products from these affected countries, because so whenever we import without any regulation the pork meat from the countries which have a higher prevalence of this African swine fever, there is a possibility that it would also spreads rapidly in the import country, right? So therefore adequate precautions have to be taken to prevent the spread of this, prevent not just the spread but even prevent the outbreak of this African swine fever is also very, very important, because we have recently come out of the a destructive impact of the COVID-19 pandemic in last 2-3 years. So therefore it is very important that we cannot afford any such major disease outbreak. And when we talk about these viral diseases, so viral diseases evolve very fast, right? So they evolve very fast and they can turn fatal for the human beings also. They can spread much more easily. So therefore we need to be more precautious, and we need to be careful whenever we're talking about these diseases, right? So apart from that, several other biosecurity principles, and we need to keep animals healthy. All these measures have to be taken to ensure that the African swine fever would not spread to human beings and would not spread to the new areas, right? So when we talk about the news, that is the outbreak of African swine fever in Kerala, and that led to the killing of 310 pigs, or culling of 310 pigs by the farmers and the authorities, right? So the area within one radius of the affected farm, for example, imagine that this is an affected farm with pigs, and the area within 1 kilometer of the radius would be declared as the disease hit area. So therefore adequate precautions and measures would be taken to prevent the further spread of this disease from this affected farm. And apart from that, within 10 kilometers of the radius has been declared as the surveillance area for the strict surveillance of, because when we declare a surveillance area, disease hit area, we can generally prevent the movement of animals to and from to this affected area. So that would essentially prevent the spread of the disease. Now, next very important article is with respect to the biodiversity register. Now, what exactly is this biodiversity register? Now, we'll try to understand this biodiversity register, right? So, we all knew that, there is a Biodiversity Protection Act, right? So, in India, we have Biodiversity Act of 2002. So, this was passed by the Parliament of India in the year 2002. And we also knew that there is a convention on biodiversity. So Convention on Biodiversity. So taking inspiration from the Convention on Biodiversity, Parliament of India passed Biodiversity Act of 2002. Now this Biodiversity Act of 2002 mandates that the local level, at the local level, a village level, a block level or district level, so the community can maintain the biodiversity register. Community can actually maintain this biodiversity register. Now, biodiversity register actually consists of all the details of different flora and fauna, right? So when these biodiversity registers are properly maintained, so they actually help in protection and conservation of biodiversity without a doubt, right? Protection and conservation of biodiversity. And apart from that, so these biodiversity registers also envisions community participation, because community will be actively engaged in preparation of these biodiversity registers. And apart from that, so once they prepare these biodiversity registers, they can also actively engage in protection and conservation of the biodiversity. Now essentially it aimed at the protection of biodiversity at the local level, and this is also bottom up approach, not top down approach, rather bottom up approach, which envisions community participation in the protection and conservation of biodiversity. Now we'll understand the context as we have briefly understood the Biodiversity Act and biodiversity registers, because so when we talk about the biodiversity, so for example, imagine an area, the species richness in that particular area is known as biodiversity, right? Imagine that there is an area A. So in that particular area A, species richness or richness of species in that particular area determines the degree of biodiversity of that particular region, right? So this biodiversity register actually records all the biodiversity of a particular region, and that is being mandated by the Biodiversity Act of 2002. Now understand the context of this article. The context is that Indian black turtle, so it is also known as Indian pond terrapin, right? So this is a turtle species. It is also known as Indian pond terrapin. So in fact, it was once a very common species near this Tajakara Gram Panchayat in Kerala's Alappuzha district. So it was a very common species. So even though once it was a very common species, in recent times what has been happening in recent times, because of degradation of habitat, deforestation, increasing anthropogenic activities, illegal wildlife trade, all these factors have been leading to the declining the biodiversity of few areas or declining number of species. So they are also increasingly facing the threat of extinction in recent times. So primarily because of anthropogenic activities, climate change, and then extinction of species, right? So however, a number of the Indian black turtle or Indian pond terrapin have been significantly dwindling in recent times, primarily because of poaching for meat. So the Indian pond terrapin is poached for meat. So that is one reason which has been leading to the dwindling numbers of Indian pond terrapin, right? So this biodiversity registers makes it mandatory that the local level bodies should maintain this register and also involve community in the protection and conservation of species. So therefore they can play a very active role in preventing poaching of such vulnerable species, right? So in fact, according to some data, the populations of Indian garden lizards, barn owls, Indian flying foxes. Now understand one thing, this flying fox was asked in UPSC this time, right? So there was a question on Indian flying foxes. So these type of articles are very, very important from your exam perspective, right? So because these species time and again asked in your UPSC examination, right? So Indian flying foxes, plants such as henna, palash, so all these species have declined in recent times, so decreased in recent times. So why they were being decreased in recent times? So again, I can tell you that anthropogenic factors, right? So anthropogenic factors have been leading to the deforestation and illegal encroachment of the forest areas, and illegal mining in these forest areas. And apart from that, recent events of forest fires that have been taking place, and even fragmentation of the habitat has been taking place in these forest areas. Now fragmentation of forests have been taking place because of the infrastructure projects which are passing through these forest areas, sensitive areas, and that has been disturbing the wildlife. So all these factors have been a major factor, we should not forget this. So it is poaching and even the wildlife trade, illegal wildlife trade. So all these factors have been the leading causes of the decline in the species that we have discussed. However, the details about the dwindling numbers or declining numbers of different species are actually part of the extensive information that is already available in the second volume of the People's Biodiversity Register, right? So as I have already told you that this People's Biodiversity Register is mandated by the Biodiversity Act of 2002. So the details about these species we get to know about this extensive information available through the second People's Biodiversity Register, which is being prepared by the local body or which is being prepared by the panchayats themselves. However, recently one panchayat in Kerala, so that is Tajkara, right, that is Tajkara, so that recently submitted 261 page document, right? So this particular panchayat has submitted a document of 261 pages, and this document have all the details about the region's biodiversity, including identification of different resources, a new discovery of different species. The traditional knowledge is mentioned in that particular People's Biodiversity Register, and ongoing changes that have been taking place in the composition of the species or the degradation of the forest areas, and even impact of the climate change. So everything is very clearly mentioned in this second volume of the People's Biodiversity Register at the local body in Kerala. And in fact, the first volume of the People's Biodiversity Register was published 10 years ago. Right, so it was published 10 years ago, and in fact it lacked the vital information, right? So when we talk about the second volume has all the information, right? So the impact of climate change on the environment and the local resources, traditional agricultural practices, traditional knowledge, so that is preserved and practiced by the people at the local body level. So everything is mentioned in the second biodiversity People's Biodiversity Registers. But the first volume of the People's Biodiversity Register is not that clear, not that detailed. That was published 10 years ago. However, so again I am emphasizing on this, but the second People's Biodiversity Register is a comprehensive document on the biodiversity across 21 wards in this particular panchayat, Tajkara panchayat. However, so the survey with respect to the species that are found within this local body range of Tajakara Gram Panchayat, so that particular survey about the species was conducted for 3 months. Okay, so it was conducted for 3 months and prepare a PBR, People's Biodiversity Register. And in fact, this People's Biodiversity Register was prepared by the trained volunteers within the Gram Panchayat level. Now, all other states and the local bodies should emulate such practices. Now, when they start emulating such practices, so it essentially means that people are directly engaged in the protection and conservation of the species, protection and conservation of the biodiversity, and that is very important. So along with the government efforts to protect biodiversity, people should also actively take part in the conservation and protection of biodiversity. So that would give sustainable results in the long term. So therefore, so the second volume of People's Biodiversity Register was carried out by these trained volunteers. And in fact, as I have already told you, that the second volume of People's Biodiversity Register contains all important details with respect to biodiversity, not just with respect to biodiversity, but the resources that are available and the changes that have been taking place in the environment, and the impact of the climate change and traditional agricultural practices that people generally follow. So all these details are very clearly mentioned in this second volume of the People's Biodiversity Register, but the first volume did not mention all those details in a very detailed manner. Now, in fact, this People's Biodiversity Register's role in the conservation of species should not be neglected, right? So we should not generally neglect the role that the People's Biodiversity Register can play in the conservation and protection of the biodiversity. Because so with the help of this People's Biodiversity Register, so we can actually ensure the efficient resources utilization, and we can also protect the traditional knowledge. Because so once we recognize the traditional knowledge and once we record that particular traditional knowledge, so certainly we would take a few measures to protect the biodiversity and ensure efficient resource utilization, and also the recorded traditional knowledge would be further promoted, right? So government would announce certain incentives for the people who have been practicing this traditional knowledge, so thereby the traditional knowledge is a wealth for us, so that would be further encouraged through this People's Biodiversity Register. And in fact, the local body is actually in the process of preparing various projects in agriculture, drinking water, waste management. So all these things were taken up by that particular local body in Kerala, right? So however, even though the local body in Kerala have taken up all these projects, but it has also focused on biodiversity conservation and equitable sharing of the benefits with the people. Now, in fact, when we talk about this People's Biodiversity Register in Kerala, it is the first state in the country to publish the first volume of People's Biodiversity Register across all local bodies, right? So this is very, very important. So when we talk about the first state which had published the People's Biodiversity Register 10 years back, so that was the Kerala, right? So this document, the People's Biodiversity Register, is a dynamic document, so that actually requires a periodic updates, right? So it is also important because of climate change and increasing anthropogenic pressure on the environment and the ecosystem. So there is a rapid change in the ecosystem that has been taking place. So therefore, particularly in this regard, it is very important that we need to regularly update this People's Biodiversity Register, the details of the ecosystem, landscapes and species along with the traditional knowledge, and only then we will be able to take a concerted measures to protect the species and the traditional knowledge. And another very important aspect of this People's Biodiversity Register is that this Tajakhara has become the first panchayat in Alappuzha. right? So this has become the first panchayat in Alappuzha, and in fact it is one of the first in Kerala to update and even publish a comprehensive people's biodiversity register with involvement of the local communities. So local communities have involved in preparation of this second biodiversity register, right? So people's biodiversity register. Now when we talk about this people's biodiversity register, not all local bodies across the country would generally prepare such comprehensive documents about the species composition in the local body range. So therefore Kerala has actually taken a lead in this regard with respect to the preparation of this people's biodiversity register. So therefore all states and local bodies should emulate the methods that the Kerala government and local bodies have adopted, and they should also start preparing this comprehensive people's biodiversity register. So that is the first step to achieve conservation and sustainable utilization of the biodiversity resources, right? So what exactly is this people's biodiversity register, right? So people's biodiversity register is a legal document. So why it is a legal document? It is a legal document because it was mandated by the Biodiversity Act of 2002. And in fact this biodiversity register, people's biodiversity register, actually consisting of a comprehensive list of local bioresources along with the traditional knowledge and the practices of the people concerned in that particular area under the biodiversity management committees. So at the local level, the Biodiversity Act of 2002 also mandated that there should be these biodiversity management committees for the protection, conservation and sustainable utilization of the biodiversities, so within that local level. So because of that reason these committees were constituted. Under these committees the people's biodiversity registers are actually prepared about the composition and changes in the biodiversity. And in fact, so it has also highlights a brief idea of landscape and demography of the concerned area. So as per Rule 22 Clause 10 of the Biodiversity Rules 2004, preparation of this biodiversity register in that particular area is a primary mandate of the concerned biodiversity management committees, right? So what the standard method that is being adopted by this people's biodiversity register is developed by the National Biodiversity Authority. Now remember that these national biodiversity authorities and state biodiversity authorities were also constituted under the Biodiversity Act of 2002, right? So the standard methodology for this people's biodiversity register was also developed by the National Biodiversity Authority, and in fact is followed pan-India, and people's biodiversity register is being prepared by the this particular biodiversity management committees in consultation with the local people, right? So that's all about this people's biodiversity register, so that aimed at conservation and protection of biodiversity at the local level, right? So next important article. So we all knew that if you look into the Indian economy, especially the workforce participation in the Indian economy, so it is a very often stressed issue that there is a low female labor force participation in India. A very less number of female actually take part in the economic activity. So generally because of number of reasons, lack of skills, lack of training, lack of education, lack of active support from their families, and the social stereotypes about women. So all these factors actually discourage women participation in the workforce. And even if you look into the conventional economic activity, there is also a huge wage difference between men and women. So that wage difference, and even there are instances of sexual harassment of women at workplace. So all these instances have been making women discouraged. So they are actually discouraging women's participation in the workforce, and because of that reason a low female labor force participation in Indian economic activity, and that is really a cause of concern, especially for India, right? So recently there were number of efforts from the government side towards financial inclusion. So one such effort was this Jan Dhan Yojana accounts creation, right? So in fact, a huge number of accounts were created under this Jan Dhan Yojana program, so a flagship financial inclusion program. So in fact, government efforts towards financial inclusion have highlighted a critical barrier. A critical barrier or a very important barrier is being highlighted when the government has been taking certain measures or efforts for financial inclusion. So they include a low labor force participation among women. So that is a key cause of concern, especially in rural areas. It is fine because there is a concept called feminization of agriculture, right? So in this particular concept, women actually take up agriculture. There is active participation of women in rural areas in agriculture sector, but in urban areas there is a very less participation of women in the economy. Now, according to some data, it is held that in the year 2022, only 32.8% of the women are part of the workforce. In contrast to around 77% of men have engaged in the workforce, but only 32.8% of the women were part of the workforce. So this is a very significantly less number of women taking part, active part in the workforce. So however, the other shocking data is that around 20% of women have engaged or they are leading the micro, small and medium enterprises, right? So around 20% of the women are actually the managers of the micro, small and medium enterprises. We can say that 20% of the MSMEs are managed by the women. So but despite 20% of the MSMEs are being managed by the women, the total credit which is being given to the MSMEs, only 7% is being given to the women. So that also indicating a stark discrimination discrimination against women, especially with respect to the institutional credit. Now, when women don't have access to the institutional credit, so we cannot expect that women would perform better in the economic sector, because when women have been managing these MSMEs and when women are also getting a better institutional credit, a better proportion of institutional credit, so it is a very high likely that women would also engage more women, and that would lead to the economic empowerment, financial independence, self-reliance of women, and that is very important here. But women are getting just 7% of the institutional credit, and this issue must be looked into. And apart from that, there are a number of issues which actually discourage women's participation in the workforce, right? So we can call them as structural issues or structural challenges. So these challenges have been discouraging women's participation in the workforce. Now, what are those structural issues? For example, women do not have access to the institutional credit, right? So since only 7% of the total credit is being given to the woman within these MSMEs, women generally don't have access to the institutional credit, so they have very less capital to invest and further expand their operations. And after that, there are also restrictive social norms in the sense that women generally restricted to study, to go for higher education, to skill themselves, to train themselves, and even be part of the economy. So there are also restrictive social norms against women. And apart from that, women also have unequal access to education, training, and lower wages which are being given to women. And with respect to the management of the companies and industries, women are generally less preferred, right? So all these factors have been making that there is a poor participation of women in the workforce. Now, when we look into the data with respect to the participation of women in the workforce, so it is very clear that there is a low labor force participation rates for women. As I've explained earlier, 32.8% of the women only takes part in the economic activity in the year 2022, as against 77% of the men taking part in the economy. right? So in fact, there is a huge potential in terms of women taking part in the economic activity, taking up employment. That would significantly boost India's GDP, so that would also contribute to the economic development also. So again, there was also a discrepancies with respect to access to institutional credit, as I have already explained, that despite 20% of the MSMEs are owned by women, only 7% of the total credit which is being given to the MSMEs was actually allocated for the women. And since women have less capital and less access to institutional credit, so we cannot expect that they can significantly expand their area of operations, their productivity, everything, right? So that is also another impediment or another barrier that women have been very often facing. And it is very important to quote the report that is being published by World Economic Forum. Now, World Economic Forum releases the gender gap report. Now remember, this particular report is very, very important. So you just remember, the gender gap report is released by World Economic Forum. So this report also says that India ranked 135 out of 146 countries, and in fact it is also a poor ranking for India in terms of women workforce participation, right? So a very poor ranking, because India ranked very less. India was at the bottom in terms of women workforce participation, women empowerment, security for the women at the workforce. So in 2022 it was 135 out of 146 countries, and in fact it was also behind several small neighbors such as Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, Bhutan, Nepal. So therefore India have to accept these inequalities that were existing in the economy, and the biases between men and women, and the gender inequalities that are prevalent across different sectors, and need to undertake certain efforts to bridge this gender inequality, and also undertake certain measures for the empowerment of women. So particularly with respect to this 33% of reservation for women in the Lok Sabha and state legislative assemblies, a welcome initiative from the government side, right? So after that, there is also a huge gender pay gap between men and women, so that should also be addressed, right? So for example, imagine that there is a company, and in that particular company the roles and the responsibilities for men and women are same. Even though the roles and responsibilities for men and women are same, generally women were paid very less, and this very often happens in the unorganized sector, not in the formal sector. Rather, it happens in the unorganized sector. Also remember that in India, 88% of the economic activity takes place in the unorganized or informal sector. So therefore, there is also a huge gender pay gap that was existing in the workforce, and that also discourages women's workforce participation. And this gender pay gap in the workforce is highlighted by the Oxfam India discrimination report of 2022, right? So women in the management positions, so that is also significantly less, right? So women generally have a less participation, or women management roles were generally not encouraged. So that is also another issue. Now, what are the barriers to ensure financial inclusion of women? So there are a lot of barriers. First and foremost, when we talk about the structural challenges that were existing, so women very often have limited capital, right? So just we have explained that only 7% of the total credit that is being given to the MSMEs is actually given to the women, despite women have been contributing to the 20% of the total MSMEs. Okay, imagine that there are 100 MSMEs, and within these 100 MSMEs, 80 MSMEs are owned by men and 20 MSMEs are owned by women, right? So now 93% of the institutional credit is being given to the men owned MSMEs, and just 7% of the institutional credit is being given to the women owned MSMEs. Now you can see there is a lot of discrimination that is prevalent with respect to access to the institutional credit for women owned MSMEs. And apart from that, there are also a lot of societal norms, and these societal norms are also preventing women to actively take part in the economic activity or to take up the employment. Right? There are a lot of inherent restrictions that we normally see. For example, when woman marries, the family would not generally allow women to work. Right? So that is also, a restriction, a social barrier. So that is being imposed on the woman. And now also, majority of the society sees women's key responsibilities would be looking after the family, looking after the elders and the children. Right? So that is the kind of a mindset that the people have, and because of that reason, women were not be able to take part in the economic activity. And after that, women have very often well known for this unpaid labor. So women actually do a lot of work at the household level, or even at different levels. But most of the work that women were doing is actually not part of the calculation of the GDP. Right? So whatever women do, that work is not paid. Right? So this is generally considered as her obligation to the family. Right? So unpaid labor is performed by the woman. And vulnerable employment opportunities. For example, whenever woman gets into employment, women have been facing this sexual harassment at workplaces. And this gender pay gap as highlighted by the Oxfam report. So all these factors have been making women more and more vulnerable to the employment. Right? So, and apart from that, unequal access to education, training and skilling for the woman, all these factors are the structural challenges that women have been facing, and because of that reason, women were not actively part in the economic activity. And after that, there are also certain perceptions and biases against women. For example, there are stereotypes of women borrowers or at higher, for example, imagine that there's a bank A, and imagine one woman approaches bank A for an institutional credit. So despite she is eligible and despite she is efficient in running her own business, the people in bank A or the management of bank A thinks that if we give loan to women, then we would face the higher risk of getting this loan default. So because of that reason, so this perception, in the society, this perception in the different levels of the economy generally discourages women's participation. Right? So after that, there are also, higher interest rates for women because of, they believe that whenever we give loans to women, that particular loan would face the higher risk of default. And because of that reason, they charge a very high interest rate that discourages women to take loans or institutional credit or lend money. After that, stringent collateral requirements are being imposed and even loan rejections by these banks. And because of that reason, only 7% of the total loans are being given to the women-owned MSMEs. So after that, there are also certain behavioral factors. So these behavioral factors include risk aversion, lower confidence in negotiating loan terms, and even the fear of rejection. So all these factors were prevalent, and these factors have been making that women were not able to take up part in the economic activity. Now, so what are the pathways to enhance women's participation? Now, how can we enhance women's participation? There are a number of ways, so through which we can significantly enhance women's participation in the economic activity, right? So first and foremost thing is that we need to promote the fair assessment and treatment of women barriers. So for this, we need to sensitize the bank authorities, the personals, right? So sensitization of banking personnel and the people who are managing this is very, very important, right? So that would help prevent these biases against women, and women would also get access to a credit on an equal terms similar to men. So that is very important because that helps women get ready institutional credit, and they can expand their operations, they can expand their business, and they can employ more and more women in their operations. So that is how it will lead to the economic empowerment and self-reliance of women. And after that, it is also very important that we must focus on financial literacy. Now remember, yesterday we talked about the computer literacy. Now along with the computer literacy, the digital literacy and financial literacy is also very, very important for the woman to take up active part in the economy, and we need to skill the woman, right? So after the COVID-19 pandemic, work from home has got a lot of importance. Now in this context, there are a lot of educated women. So if we give them correct skill and right training, so they can take up the opportunities of this work from home, and we can also ensure security and safety of women, right? So after that, so we can also expect that more women are actually taking part in the economic activity. And similarly, we need to ensure access to the capital for the woman, right? So easier access to credit for the woman on reasonable terms, lower interest rates, and a little bit less restrictive collateral requirements is very, very important for women to get more credit and encourage women to become entrepreneurs, right? So when they become entrepreneurs, so it would lead to a positive impact on other women also, right? So after that, we need to support the women-led MSMEs by giving them institutional credit, giving them training, technology, so certain incentives, concessions. So all these things are very, very important. Regular skilling and training of the women-led MSMEs is very important. So therefore, for this particular purpose, we need to tailor support and incentives to foster growth and the sustainability aspects. And similarly, we should generally expect an increased involvement of women in the entrepreneurship. So that could potentially boost India's GDP by around 0.7 trillion by 2025, and that would also contribute to the $5 trillion goal of Indian economy by 2025 as well, right? So now the next important article is with respect to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Now 2 days back we have discussed that Shanghai Cooperation Organization is going to happen in Kazakhstan, and Prime Minister Narendra Modi is not going to attend this Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting, but on behalf of Prime Minister and from India, Dr. S. Jaishankar is going to attend the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting. So even though Prime Minister Narendra Modi is not attending this Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting, so immediately after this meeting, Prime Minister is going to meet Russian President Vladimir Putin, right? So in this context, so we will understand what is India's strategic stance on this Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Now, why Prime Minister Narendra Modi is not going to attend this SCO meet, right? So there are some details given over here about the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So you can go through all these details. So when it was established, when India became part of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, so what are the goals and objectives, and what is the structure of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization? All these details have been given. Now the context is that Prime Minister Narendra Modi is not going to attend the 24th Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit. However, so even though he's not going to attend the 24th Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting, so Prime Minister Narendra Modi is going to visit Russia, and that highlights India's independent foreign policy. Our foreign policy is independent, and our foreign policy is not influenced by any other external factor or any other country. So we are sovereign and we follow independent foreign policy. So this decision from India actually highlights India's independent foreign policy and even strategic balancing in regional organizations. So right, so we wanted to balance these regional organizations. Strategic balancing is very important. Now, what is India's approach towards the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, right? Now, India's Shanghai Cooperation Organization agenda is actually based on the Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. We very often heard about this Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam in recent times, particularly Indian government trying to popularize this term. right? So at the global level, right? So India's general agenda to the SCO is guided by the Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam essentially means that the world is one family, right? So apart from this Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, so India's agenda to this Shanghai Cooperation Organization is also guided by secure. Now when I say secure, so it essentially means security, economic development, connectivity, unity, respect for the sovereignty, and even the environmental protection. Now just remember this term secure, and you can use this term secure whenever the question is being asked about the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. You should not forget both Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam along with secure, right? So you can mention these two terms, so that would add a lot of value to your answer. However, this is particularly a balancing act from India. For example, when Prime Minister Narendra Modi, head of the government, is not attending the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting, in which both Russia and China are key members. And in fact, with Russia's support, we have become a member of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, right? So on the one hand, India is not going to, especially Prime Minister Narendra Modi is not going for this SCO meeting. He's not going for the SCO meeting, but now he's going to visit Russia to meet President Vladimir Putin. So that indicating a balancing act from India, right? So apart from that, India has also been very often balancing between its interests in the West and East, especially with Europe, US, and Russia and China. So most probably we can talk about China here with respect to East. So therefore, India maintains a steady balance between US and Russia, and we continuing our close relations, right? So so we are continuing our close relations with Moscow without compromising its position on the global conflicts. And apart from that, the independent stance that we have been adopted in recent times. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's absence from the SCO summit is not due to US influence, since US has been asking or pressurizing India to not to attend this SCO summit. This is not the case. Rather, we have our strategic interests, strategic calculations, and based on that, Prime Minister Narendra Modi is not attending the SCO summit that is going to happen. So rather, it is a strategic consideration of India that Prime Minister Narendra Modi is going to visit the Russia. And apart from that, so we need to understand SCO dynamics and what would be the India's role in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, right? So in fact, when we talk about India's membership in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, so it is a full-time member. Now India and Pakistan have joined in the same year. They've become members of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization in the same year. Now when we talk about India's membership, so Russia has actually actively supported India's membership into the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, but on the other hand, China has insisted that Pakistan should also be part of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, right? So they wanted to keep India under control in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So even though Pakistan is no match for India, so they planned to include Pakistan also in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, right? But on the other hand, why Russia wanted India should be included in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization is specifically because Russia wanted to counterbalance China, right? So because within the Shanghai Cooperation Organization grouping, there is an increased influence of China, right? But on the other hand, Russia don't want that Shanghai Cooperation Organization machinery should be completely controlled by China. So therefore, in order to counterbalance China, Russia very often insisted and supported India's membership or India's entry into the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So that therefore, there would be a balance. And apart from that, in recent times, India is very often viewed as a very strong fulcrum for extending this Eurasian Forum beyond Central Asia to South Asia, right? So this Shanghai Cooperation Organization India can actually play a very important role. as a link country between Central Asia and South Asia, and because of that reason, so India's membership is actively supported. So after that, what are the strategic considerations for India? So a specific visit of Prime Minister Narendra Modi to Russia. Now for India, Central Asia is focused. So connectivity with Central Asia is very, very important for India, right? So India very often aims to revive the cultural and economic ties with the Central Asia, right? So we wanted to revive cultural and economic ties. And for example, when we talk about economic ties and cultural ties, connectivity is very important, right? So connectivity is very important. For the connectivity, India is part of the international north-south transport corridor. And apart from this, we also have this Chabahar port agreement with Iran. Through Iran, we can access Afghanistan and Central Asia. Right? So the economic ties and cultural ties can be possible through the connectivity. So therefore, India's main focus is further enhancing its cultural and economic ties with the Central Asia through further improving the connectivity, right? So apart from that, when we talk about the Indo-Pacific as a geostrategic construct, so India's role in Indo-Pacific and Indo-Pacific economic framework actually makes that India is a very attractive and very important partner for these Central Asian economies. Now, very often the Central Asian economies are landlocked countries. Even though they have rich mineral resources, they are very often landlocked countries. But on the other hand, India is a very big market for them. Right, so India is also a rising superpower. So in this respect, for all these Central Asian countries, India is very, very important partner because of India's increasing role in the Indo-Pacific and Indo-Pacific economic framework, because India can actually balance China in the Central Asian region. So after that, Prime Minister Narendra Modi is going to visit Russia. And this particular visit of Prime Minister Narendra Modi to Russia expected to further strengthen the bilateral ties, and that would also reaffirm India's foreign policy or independent foreign policy. Now that's all in this lecture, and thank you so much. So I hope you have learned something, and if you really like a video, please subscribe our YouTube channel and also hit the like button. Thank you.